Hello and welcome to my podcast, Used to Be's Do Count, with me, Dean James. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 8, I Used to Be Hopeless. In this episode, I speak with Brezz Hall about his lifelong struggle to overcome addiction. A trigger warning here, guys, this episode does explore themes around child abuse, alcoholism, drug abuse and misuse, and also suicidal idealizations. But it also explores themes around a man turning his life around for the better.
But 13 was the age when I started to consume alcohol more regularly. I never really thought, where am I going to be at 20? Where am I going to be at 30? I really thought they were helping.
And then you're just on this vicious cycle of depressants, stimulants. Was that how it looked for you?
You know why people always talk about having purpose and hope. It's my driving force.
As mentioned, there are very sensitive themes that we do explore in this episode, and if you or anyone that you know is in need of any help and support for any of the topics raised, please go into the show notes and utilise the links there. But for now, let's dive in and enjoy the episode.
All right, so Brezz, welcome to Used to Be's Do Count. Thank you so much for being with me today to talk to me. I'm very excited to speak to you about everything that you're doing. But for those people who don't know you, Brezz, let everyone know, who are you, where are you in the world, and what are you up to right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Brezz. I am located in Delaware, in the U.S. I am in recovery. My recovery date is February 26, 2021. I am currently a certified peer, working with people who struggle with addiction and mental health. I have 2 grandchildren, a wife, daughter.
Wonderful. Congratulations on being in recovery for so long. February 26, 2021. That's fantastic achievement. And I know that you are doing wonderful work to help others in recovery or deal with and cope with addiction on a daily basis. And we're going to talk about all of that because what you're doing is fantastic and it's so interesting and it's so important to have people like you in your community. However, as you know, this is Used to Be's Do Count. So we do want to focus a lot of the conversation today on your used to be. So what was your used to be?
I was hopeless, man. I didn't have purpose in life. I've just struggled with a lot of loss, which led to mental health. There's a lot of trauma in my story, which led into the depths of addiction. All of that.
Yeah. So this episode is called I Used to Be Hopeless, and your story is one of regaining hope, which we're going to talk about a lot, about how you regained hope, which is fantastic. And first of all, you've got the perfect t-shirt on. For anyone who's listening and not watching, you've got a beautiful t-shirt on which says hope right on your chest near your heart, which is fantastic. I just want to draw attention to that. Love that.
That was unintentional.
It really? It was just something you thought.
Until you made the connection before we started recording, yeah.
Sometimes, Brezz, the stars just align and we have to trust the universe, and it seems that happened today. I'm really excited that you're here today to talk about this because your story is, you've been through a hell of a lot in your life, and I want to really get into that. What I'd like to understand to start this, because, this feeling of hopelessness, and so lots of people out there have sometimes experienced some feeling of hopelessness, and it is awful when we lose hope in the world or in ourselves or in a situation. I know that when you maybe felt hopeless, you wasn't necessarily aware enough to understand that, but now looking back on it, can you draw back to a time that you can say now that you started to realize that you started to lose hope?
Obviously in the later stages of my addiction, things had gotten really dark. However, coming from uh, the trauma that I endured early on in my life, I honestly feel that hope was. I don't know if I can remember a time when I had at least the level of hope that I established once I got into recovery. Um,
So you're saying really from a very early age, you can't recall feeling hopeful at all. You were, let me just try to understand that a little bit, Breeze. I mean, that is devastating to hear. What kind of environment were you growing up in? Just give me a little bit of a flavor of how your household was as a child and what kind of things were going on.
well, um, my father struggled with alcoholism and addiction. You know, he was physically and emotionally, mentally abusive. So there was a lot of fear in the household. Uh, and that's as far back as I can remember. So
Did your dad was he had alcohol problems, right? You said how many brothers and sisters did you have?
so I have a younger brother, 3 years younger than me, and I have an older brother who is 5 years older than me.
Okay. And it was abusive. You said there was physical, there was mental, there was emotional abuse that was coming from your father and to everyone, to your mum and to you and your siblings, to everyone in the household.
Yes. My older brother's a little bit of a different story. As far as my memory serves me, because he was 5 years older, he kind of had the luxury, that's probably not the best way to word it, but of removing himself. He wasn't home often. And then there's a little bit more depth to that. He wasn't my father's son. He was his stepson. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
so
I did wonder with a 5 year older brother whether there was some form of protection there for you and your younger brother, but actually no, it was just the case that actually he was able to remove himself and he did and he would that left you and your younger brother to deal with a lot of that. So then I guess did you take a role of protector for your younger brother, or were you just too young and trying to cope with surviving yourself? Like, how was the relationship between you and your sibling?
um, I it was it's hard to explain. There was so much fear there. I mean, the fear was it was unexplainable. My younger brother and I were very close. We were, roughly 2.5 years apart. And we spent a lot of time together. My mother was the main protector, I would say, when it came to my father's particularly physical abuse. But she also was a victim of that. So, um, it's difficult because my memory is very spotty from my youth, just because of trauma and blocking that kind of stuff out. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a coping mechanism, isn't it? And we're going back there today, which is like not easy to do. And I just wanted to understand, we don't need to delve into the details of it, but I just wanted to understand the kind of environment that you grew up in because, of course, addiction, as we know, is social, but it also has this genetic pull. And so you kind of had this environmental aspects that you were living in, this genetic aspects that you were living in because your dad was an alcoholic, as you said, and then this social and society aspect of it as well. When did you start to take substances, whether that was alcohol or anything else, and start to have issues with addiction yourself? When did that happen?
so I always identified, around the age 13. I may have had my first drink prior to that, but 13 was the age when I started to consume alcohol more regularly. Um, and I started, smoking weed. And it just progressed from there. It's very difficult. I've thought a lot about like when it's difficult to identify when addiction kind of got a hold of me. I feel like it's always kind of been a part of me, you know?
Yeah, in that environment, I can imagine that it was. And you were probably surrounded by alcohol, which was completely normalized. And then at 13, you remember that you started to drink more alcohol and maybe experiment with a bit of weed or whatever. Was there something significant that happened at 13, or was it just a coming of age thing?
Yeah, it was accessibility, I would say. I had a friend of mine who his mother would start, she would go on the weekend, she would go to the liquor store for us and she would pick us up alcohol and it wasn't an excessive amount. She'd pick us up like a 6 pack or something. And you know, in hindsight, I can see the addiction was already there because we would drink and we would my friend would get sick, I would get sick, and he would not want to drink more. He would, the next day he wouldn't want to drink again. And I kind of liked that that insight. I just wanted to keep drinking and I wanted to her to go to the store again. I remember pestering him, you know, can your mom go back to the store for us? Can she go to the store again?
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of people who have addiction problems, and they all say the same thing where they realize that they are drinking or using whatever it is differently to their peers. They don't have an off switch. And this is, an addictive personality, some people call it, or addictive traits, or whatever kind of you want to say to frame that. But I guess if that's in you, if it's in your psyche, it's there. And whether that's nature or nurture or a bit of both, it seems like that was there for you. So you noticed even at that age that you were drinking differently to your friends, that you didn't necessarily have an off switch. You wanted to carry on at that young age. Wow. Was it just drink? Did it lead to any other substances that you were using?
Well, when I was 19 was the first time that I just stepped outside of like marijuana. Um,
So from 13 to 19, it was alcohol and weed, basically. And then at 19, you started to experiment with other things. What other things, what other substances were you using?
so this was cocaine, I think was the first drug that I tried. And I was always very aware of my father's alcoholism. And by this time, I had learned that he was also abused substances. So I wasn't able to identify that the drinking and smoking weed, there was danger there. Um, I thought that as long as I didn't drink excessively every day, there was no danger involved. But I never really wanted to get into other substances because I have heard stories about how addictive they can be and how things can get out of control. Um, but I did, make the decision to try cocaine when a couple family members of mine were doing it one time, and I kind of expressed interest in joining in, and they were very reluctant. They didn't want me to participate, but I was just adamant on being involved. And um, once I kind of broke down that barrier, um, it kind of opened the door to like, okay, well, now we're here, so it just gets worse from there. And this was in the early 2000s, so it went on to ecstasy, like MDMA, because it was really big back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like you had some sort of consciousness of how bad addiction could be because of your experience with your dad. which was good because you were kind of like, okay, as long as I'm not doing it every day and I'm not addicted, it's fine. And that's a good thing. I mean, you almost from life experience try to put some guardrails up, but at that age, you're also still naive as much as we all think we're adults at that age. I just want to understand between 13 and 19 and where you were. Were you still in your family home then? Did you finish school? Did you go to college? Like, were you sort of living, I guess, what we would say a normal, regular young person's life, and then having alcohol and drugs on the side? Because also that's normalized in teenage years. You know, lots of experimental stuff happening in teenage years, and it's normalized for addictive people or addictive personalities. Again, certainly they use differently to other people, but was that happening? Was that normal schooling, colleging, all of that stuff?
No, there's a lot of there's a lot to the story, but it was not a typical home life. My mother and father separated right around 13, um, when I was 13. And he had moved out of the home, so it was just us in the home. Um, and then when I was 14, my father actually passed of a heroin overdose. And when that happened, um, my mother started, coping with life the best way she knew how, which was, going out a lot, and she began drinking heavily and leaving me and my younger brother at home a lot.
Oh,
And
wow. Wow. Okay. So you actually lost your dad to a heroin overdose when you were 14 years old.
yeah,
Wow. Wow. And your mum, who was the next parental guidance, your next parental um person to keep you safe and on track, kind of fell off track herself and was using drinking lots of alcohol, going out and leaving you guys alone.
yeah. Um,
Okay. So this was kids bringing up themselves, really, essentially. And I guess you weren't really making it to school full time. Um,
no, I struggled with attendance in school for a majority of my life, particularly from like 14 on. Before my father passed, there was a lot of fear, right? So a lot of my proper conduct and how I carried myself was out of a place of fear. You know, there's, you have to go to school and you have to put in effort because there will be consequences if you don't. Once my father passed and I'm dealing with all this pain and the trauma and all this stuff, I began to not try in school. I didn't put in effort. I was there, but I wasn't there. I ended up dropping out of high school actually in my senior year. And by that time, once I made it to high school, I was drinking. I was not going to school so I could be on the street drinking, and smoking weed. Smoking weed was a big problem as I see it now, but obviously then I didn't see it as a problem.
yeah, yeah. So smoking weed was a massive part of what you were doing. You were not going to school, hanging around on the streets, drinking, but smoking weed massively, mainly was the biggest thing. So accessible as well. It still is now, but again back then, so accessible, so normalized. I think a lot of the time, marijuana, cannabis is like under what's the word? Like we don't see the full impact that it can have psychologically on people. Um, and there's all of these arguments to legalize it because it's a natural herb, and but really and truly, it is a gateway drug for lots of people. It allows an addictive person an outlet that other people socially feel is normal and safe. So it's normalized, isn't it? Same thing as alcohol, it's normalized.
Yeah.
And it is a gateway. Did it act as a gateway for you then? Did it act as a gateway drug into other things?
I don't know. I don't know if I would say it was a gateway. Only because, like I stated earlier, I was drinking and smoking weed, and I was very content on with like not doing other substances. Um, there was a point where I made a conscious decision to step outside of that. Um, well, no, that I've thought about that, and it's very difficult for me to make a decision. Even if weed, or alcohol for that matter, is bad, right? Like, should it be legal? All of that. Um, I think people have the choice to make a decision. And I know plenty of people who don't struggle with addiction and don't have those precursors that we were talking about earlier, where, um, they can smoke weed today and not tomorrow. They can drink this weekend and not on Monday. I know people who can do cocaine once or twice a year.
Yeah.
That is far from me.
No, I'm with you there. I know those people as well. And I think if you've got, well, I think probably the difference is the fact that they hadn't grown up in the environment that you'd grown up in, and you were dealing with quite a lot of trauma and grief, and you didn't necessarily get the proper help and support to process that. You were skipping school. It's not like you had any kind of structured mental health, emotional health support. You were just trying to deal with it through the best way you could, which is, we want to escape all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of your childhood, or that teenagehood coming into young adulthood, was skipping school, not really getting an education, and drinking more and smoking weed more, and that was the way that you were coping with a pretty, well, it wasn't a normal environment that you grew up in, and it certainly wasn't a safe one, it doesn't sound like.
Yeah, definitely
You
not.
you also said that you don't really remember a time where you felt hopeful. So with that, you didn't necessarily come out of education with a decent education. So you didn't feel hopeful for your future. I mean, how were you at age 19, 20, like looking to the future? Were you just living by the day? Like how were you in the world? What kind of
So, even in high school, I had friends who were wanted to go to a particular high school for whatever reason, whether that's sports or whatever what classes were available there. Um, and then in high school, I had friends who were looking at colleges, and it seems hard to understand even for me now, but I didn't think about any of that. And I didn't even think that I need to be thinking about that. It just wasn't on my radar. It was just a day-to-day survival type thing. Um, and I've always worked. I started working at 14, through like working papers with school. And I got like my first real job at 16, and I've worked ever since. But it was more of like, okay, what's the next better paying job from here? Not let's invest in myself and learn and educate and grow. It was just, okay, what's local that's going to pay me more?
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
that just
understand
kind
that.
of,
The motivator was money and getting paid, I guess, so that you could uphold a lifestyle outside of work, which was drinking, smoking, and doing whatever you needed to do. And there was not really much else apart from that in your foresight for yourself in your future.
yeah, it was survival more than planning for the future. In every sense of the word, whether it's getting through today or you know being here in 5 years. Like, I never really thought, where am I going to be at 20, where am I going to be at 30? It just never crossed my mind,
Well, yeah, I
until
mean, you
recently. I
said
mean,
about
if we're
survival,
being
and
honest.
there are reports, psychological reports of people looking at hope and hopefulness, and they say that hope is linked to three vital needs: attachment, a hope for physical proximity, intimacy, or emotional bonding. So there's a hope, there's some kind of like emotional, spiritual bond of attachment that formulates some level of hope. Mastery, a hope of productivity or sort of mastering an accomplishment, essentially. And then survival, a hope for overcoming physical challenges, anxiety, loss, fear, building resilience. One of those three things, or all of them, can formulate hope. But when you feel hopeless, I guess, you're just surviving day to day and you don't necessarily have hope around those three things. Was there any of those three things, attachment, mastery, or survival, that gave you hope at that point?
Um, when we met my wife, me and my wife have been together for a very long time. We met when I was 19. Um, yeah, so you know, that was a that was hope, you know. We've been together ever since, and we've raised a child and we have grandchildren, and had always been something that I hung on to. Um, you know, I essentially moved out of my mother's and into me and my wife's place. We lived with her mother for a while. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's nice to hear. That's
definitely
nice to
think
hear. And it's nice
outside
to
of
hear that there was a
my mother.
person in your life that is still in your life that's been consistent, because of course you have, you know, been through a lot, and she's been a consistent for you, which is fantastic. So you met at 19, and that did give you some hope in the attachment sense that I was saying before. So that's great. But you still were, I guess, spiraling, if you like, unraveling, if you like, and as you come into young adulthood, how was the addiction showing its ugly head? What kind of, how did you get to the point where it was a problem and you knew it was a problem?
Well, unfortunately, me knowing it was a problem only took a short 20-25 years, right? But there were many signs in hindsight where this was a problem, and certainly um, things that were pointed out to me. My wife did not hesitate to highlight problems and things. It's just that I choose not to see them or acknowledge them. Um, but I remember just drinking and driving was a regular thing. Um, I got my first DUI at 17, and I remember getting in. We were in the rain, and I was leaving somewhere drinking, and my wife and daughter were in the car, and I spun the car out and hit a median. Um, but even when that kind of stuff happens, my wife is very vocal, like this is a problem, and I'm just very dismissive because I don't see the severity of it. It isn't until you remove yourself that you're able to look back and say things could have went really bad really quickly, because these type
Wow,
of things are
these are
happening on
like
a
serious risky
weekly
behaviors
basis.
that you're displaying, that lots of people that are addicted display, but you have no idea how risky they are at the time. Firstly, probably because your mind is just not there. You're just in a dark place, an addictive sort of mindset. You're thinking about where you're getting, or when you can drink next, or where you're getting your next hit from. But also, it is a bit of a survival instinct, isn't it, to sort of pretend that the severity is low. And I'm just drawing that back in a way of, your dad's abusive nature, to losing your dad, how you deal with that grief, to losing your mum physically, I guess, like as a parent, she was no longer present, and there's a grief there as well. um Maybe seeing your friends go off to college and want to achieve things, and you're just there, and there's a sort of grief to that as well. you deal with that by just playing it down, don't you? It just is what it is. Let's crack on, let's survive. So then when something as severe as that, you're spinning a car out with your wife and your daughter in the car, it's like, it's nothing, because that's your response that you know. Yeah.
You rationalize it by saying everybody's okay, like nothing happened, you know. But it, it's hard to, when I think about it, it's like, well, was it me just minimizing? Um, that is definitely a large part of it, but also the environment that I grew up in and the people that I chose to associate with and spend my time with, my circle, it was normalized because everyone was doing this. When I talk about it now, I I can realize that not everyone goes through that kind of stuff. But when you're in it, that's what I grew up around. That's family and friends all have been through those type things. So it just seems like it's a part of life.
Which is why it's so important to understand the environmental factor of addiction. You know, you've grown up in an environment where it's normalized. Everyone around you, family, friends, peers, everyone is doing something similar, which normalizes that behavior. Not everyone ends up in a really, really dark place that you did, but certainly everyone is using to the extent where it is normalized. And also, we seek what we are, don't we? Like we attract what is that whole power of attraction, and we attract exactly what we are and where we are in ourselves. And so you were probably attracting the people who allowed you to be that person because that was normal. The
Yeah.
the substances that you mentioned so far, weed was a problem, right? Alcohol, you were drinking a lot as well. You then started to use cocaine. Um, Ecstasy was a massive thing back then, and you were using ecstasy as well. I kind of grew up in that era as well, where it was just massive and everywhere, and everyone was taking ecstasy and MDMA and stuff. Anything else? Is there any other substances that you were like using or experimenting with, or that became an issue regularly?
Yeah. So I've never, if people ask me, which is a common question in the recovery community, like, what was your drug of choice? I never had a drug of choice, right? My choice was whatever I could get my hands on or whatever I could get more of. So the cocaine started out as like, on the weekends, if you're going to the club or something, we would get some. But then, it's a gradual progression. Um, the ecstasy was, that's one of them drugs where you can't take that every day because you'll stop feeling the effects of it. You have to kind of give yourself a break. So that wasn't every day. But then, at some point, pills were introduced, opiates, started off with like Percocet and things like that. Um, and that kind of became like a more regular thing, you know?
Okay,
Um,
and so opioids, well, we kind of are becoming more aware globally of the issue of that, but opioids essentially are very strong painkillers, right?
yes.
And so they are prescribed in the States. Do they have to be prescribed by a doctor at that time that you're talking, or can you buy them over the counter? Or
They have to be prescribed by a doctor.
and were they prescribed to you, or were you buying them on the black market?
No, yeah, I was getting them, through people that I know or people that I know specifically just to get them, essentially just dealers.
Yeah.
And it would be, you know, I started off with like smaller ones, like 5 milligram, 10 milligram. Um, and then it just kind of grew 15 milligram, 30 milligram. Um, and even at that point, I was still kind of like aware, like I had this idea that addiction could be avoided through control, right? So as long as I didn't let myself become physically addicted to the opioid, um, then I wasn't an addict. So, I would take them for extended periods of time. And then if I started to become sick, I would ride it out. Like, okay, let's get past this, not realizing the flaw in that thought process was, well, I'm just going to use them again once I'm no longer sick,
And also
you know?
maybe not understanding how addictive they are. There's physical addiction, there's mental addiction. Addiction rears its head in lots of different ways. And maybe, and I don't know whether this is the case, but I know it's the case for a lot of people, maybe because it is a prescription drug, that you sort of look at that slightly differently to cocaine, let's say. You know, we know cocaine is more psychologically addictive than physically addictive, but it is certainly addictive, but it's more psychological than physical. Opioids, we're now beginning to understand the level of physical addiction because they've been around for a long time. There's been huge epidemics of opioid use, mainly in the States. It has come over to the UK as well, where I'm based, and it is moving around the world. But it is dangerous. And it's dangerous because there is a different way of looking at a prescribed drug, like it's safer, but in fact, it's not. Just because it's a controlled substance it doesn't mean that it's not a substance and that it's not addictive. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out. And there's been loads of films and movies and documentaries about it, and I think that's great because it's educating people a lot more. But I guess back then it was still just seen as a prescription drug that's a painkiller. So if I'm in pain, I take it, it numbs me, it makes me feel great. I've never had one, right? I've never had one. What's the feeling that you get when you take an opioid like that?
Man, euphoria. It's a warm sensation. That's probably why it's so addictive. I mean, obviously there's the physical component, but psychologically, you feel safe. You feel, I don't, that's how I felt. I can't tell you how others feel. Um, but yeah, it's hard to explain.
That's a dangerous feeling for somebody
Yeah.
who's been through a hell of a lot of tough life experiences as you have, to make you feel euphoric and safe and calm, maybe, and all of those things. It's a dangerous high, um, that's so available, so readily available. Okay, so tell me about some of the low. Tell me about reaching some really low points, so we can really understand, where you went in your dark places, Breeze.
So the loss in my life kind of continued to happen after my father. Around 2009, my mother had became really ill, and she went to the hospital. She found out that she actually had end stage cirrhosis. We didn't know
End stage
that she
cirrhosis.
was. Yeah, she.
Oh,
By the time we realized, if my memory serves me correctly, there was some signs of like jaundice. I believe that's what it's called, like yellowing of the eyes and stuff, which prompted her to go to the hospital.
right.
Um, and the thing is, like the cirrhosis wasn't brought on by drinking. I'm sure the drinking didn't help, but my mother, when she gave birth to my younger brother in '84, she almost died, and they had to do blood transfusions. Um, well, when they didn't test blood back then for hepatitis, so she ended up getting hepatitis through that. However, she never knew all those years,
Wow.
and the hepatitis caused cirrhosis. So all of this happened over the 30 years since giving birth to my brother, and we just weren't aware.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
So she was diagnosed essentially towards the end. Um, my wife has lupus. She's struggled with lupus her whole life. I mean, before I even met her, that was an issue for her. And she's had 3 kidney transplants to date. At the time that my mother got sick, or we found out she was sick, my wife had 2 transplants. So my wife had kind of connected my mom to um, the hospital which did her transplants. My mother got on a liver transplant list. She actually got the transplant in 2010. Um, at the time, there was one anti-rejection medicine available for people who had liver transplants. So she comes home from the hospital. They give her the rejection medicine. Um, she ends up being allergic to this medication. Once that happened, the doctors were like, "Well, we have no other options. This is where we are." Um, and that's a tough thing because now we know what's going to happen, and we just have to kind of ride that out.
Is there a hope at that stage that the body will not reject the liver? Is there still a possibility of that, or
No, so your body is very aware of organs that are not your own. Um, so once you have any type of transplant, you need to be on rejection medicine for the rest of your life. And if you miss a day, your body will reject the organ. My wife,
this is absolute education to me because it's not something that I've
yeah,
experienced. So this is crazy stuff to understand.
yeah, my wife still takes, obviously she still takes rejection medicine. She actually lost her second transplant to an issue with the pharmacy not being able to get her medication. There was a insurance thing. It's a whole thing, but yeah, she missed a day of medication and that kidney rejected. So it's, at that point, they're saying this is what it is. They essentially put her on hospice, um, right out of the hospital.
So you had a situation where you just said that after they knew your mum was allergic to this anti-rejection medicine, you knew the inevitable was going to happen, which was what? Her passing away, right? You were waiting for that day for her to pass. At the same
Yeah.
time, your wife had rejected a kidney because of some mess up, and she was now in a hospice. So there was a
No,
possibility.
no, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. So what I was saying is my mother was put on hospice. Um, yeah, when she was sent home from the hospital. My wife, I'm not exactly sure when my wife's second kidney rejected. It certainly wasn't simultaneous with what was going on with my mother. Um, I was just, making the connection that
Yeah,
like
yeah.
if you
Sorry,
miss
I was just trying to
medication,
sort of
yeah,
see that timeline because I mean, it's just again a lot for you to deal with, and having to deal with then the loss of your mother. So I'm guessing your mum then passed away.
yeah. So, the liver it filters all the toxins out of your body. So without that working, she just became sicker by the day, weaker by the day. Um, and I was going to her house every day to spend time with her. Um, but that was difficult for me, obviously. So that would be like a point where drinking and I was taking a lot of pain pills at that time, um, became like ramped up. Um, because to go over there, I didn't want to be, I didn't want to feel anything. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
so
I can imagine all of these mixed emotions. You don't want to lose your mum, of course, and you're dealing with the limbo stage of knowing that that's going to happen, which is just awful. But also, did you feel emotionally equipped to deal with that, as well as dealing with the stuff that your wife was dealing with? Probably not.
yeah, I I don't think I've ever felt equipped to deal with any of this stuff. It's that's part of the reason, right? That's why I turned to drugs and alcohol because I knew I wasn't able to handle it. And my mother, she passed after a few short months. And fast forward to 2017. Um, well, shortly after my mother had passed, she passed in 2010. Maybe a few years afterwards, my younger brother, who had struggled with alcoholism his whole life as well, he ended up getting sober, right? Um, and I was very proud of him for that. But at the time, I didn't have the awareness of self to realize that I also needed to do something like that. And he achieved, 4 years of sobriety. Um, in 2017, um, you know, there were some things that took place, and he essentially relapsed, and ended up passing away. Uh, so once that happened, that was a point in my life where it's like, okay, I've been doing my best to regulate. Like, I know I need to use and drink to survive, but I also know that I need to function. Once 2017 hit, it kind of was like, who cares? What is the point? You know?
Yeah, I can totally
So
understand that. I can understand that. Yeah, you're almost at that point, or up until that point, what we would call a functioning addict, right? You're still
yeah,
able to go to work and earn money and be the best you can be at that point, a husband and a father. Um, but you know that you are still an addict. But then the wheels come off and you start to spiral a little bit more. How did your brother pass away? Can I ask?
so it's hard for me to say definitively. It he when we found him, my me and my older brother had went to the house to check on him. And his car was there, but he wasn't opening the door. And my brother climbed through the window, and he was in his room on his bed. But um, the oddly enough, the um coroner, the report says alcohol related death, but there's not really any specifics. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
That's his. I know.
that's um that's also terrible. Yeah, I'm so sorry that I mean there's so much grief, isn't there? There's so much grief and it's all surrounded by alcohol and drugs, or I mean, not your mum, that was slightly different, but she certainly had issues with alcohol as well that you mentioned. It's just a whole family unit of addiction in some form. Um, you did break it, and you told me before this that it was around 2021 that you actually went into rehab and broke it. So give me an idea of what happened from when your brother passed away in 2017 up until the point where you actually reached the point of going to get help in those 3 4 years. How was
Yeah.
life spiraling out of control? How was that? Was that your rock bottom, would you say?
Rock bottom was, I would identify rock bottom as being those last couple months. It was pretty much the height of COVID, the end of 2020, going into 21. Um, but once my brother passed, um, I began seeking. I was already drinking every day. I've been drinking. I was drinking every day from high school until I got clean and sober. Um, so there becomes a point where I'm looking for more than that. Um, so, the opioids were a big thing that I was using to kind of deal with my pain when my brother passed. But then there was also cocaine. But there was a point in time shortly after he passed where um, cocaine was extremely difficult to find. Um, and when you did find it, it would be low quality. It wasn't really worth the money. And there was a situation where I had tried methamphetamines, and it essentially is cocaine times 1,000. So at the time, it's justified by saying, while spending hundreds of dollars on cocaine, I can just spend $20 on this bag and it'll last me a week, which is crazy. But that progressed so quickly. I went from a $20 bag lasted me a week to, towards the end, it was $150 bag lasted me a day,
Happens so quickly with methamphetamine because it's highly addictive, and because the high, of course, is so high, even more than cocaine a lot of the time. What kind of methamphetamines was it? Crystal meth?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and were you smoking it?
So no, ever since I tried cocaine, I kind of became addicted to sniffing things. Um, so I pretty much sniffed all of my drugs. Even the painkillers, I would crush them up and sniff them. Um, so, I was sniffing it. And, that was really starting to take a toll on my mental health. Um, I have always struggled with mental health issues. I'm bipolar, so and I went a large portion of my life unmedicated for that. Um, but the extreme highs and lows of using the methamphetamines and um, coming down off of that, in between getting more, being able to afford more, and all that, really pushed me, pushed my mental health into a not a good place. So from 2019 to 2020, I was in and out of like mental health facilities. Um, but I wasn't being honest with them, it was just like, this is my depression, this is my suicidal ideations and all these things, but no, drinking and drugs are not, I don't, not only is it not a problem, but I don't do that, you know? So
Did you feel at that time that they were separate things, or did you know that they were interweaved? It was just that you were just being dishonest with the nurses there.
no, see, it's very difficult to be honest with others when you're not honest with yourself. I I really thought they were helping, it's when I don't drink, when I don't use, I feel terrible.
So this is really
So
important. This is very interesting because this is a change of understanding substance misuse. And at that time, you didn't understand it. You had been through a lot of your life, a lot of trauma, a lot of grief, and your coping mechanisms were substances. The substances definitely were getting out of hand. You acknowledged that. But so too, after your brother passed away, did your mental health, your depression, your anxiety. And you felt at that time that the substance use, the drinking, the methamphetamines, the opioids were helping you cope with all of this anxiety. You didn't understand that they fed into one another, that this vicious cycle of addiction and depression and all of that were feeding into one another. You didn't understand that at that point at all.
yeah, and I was told, my many people, including my wife, who told me often, alcohol is a big one that people point out. Alcohol is a depressant. It's not helping, but it's hard for me to buy into that when I feel terrible, but then I have a drink and now I feel good.
There's this temporary heightened state with alcohol, that you go into this heightened state, but what happens is it doesn't last very long, and as you go down again, it's a real depressant and you do go right down. If you're already depressed, this is very hard to cope with. And then potentially, methamphetamine, which is a stimulant and a very, very successful stimulant, you could be taking that to counter that. And then you're just on this vicious cycle of depression, depressants, stimulants, depressants, stimulants. Was that how it looked for you?
Absolutely. And then, you factor in that I'm already bipolar and unmedicated. So I'm already going through those swings naturally, right? So now I've got extreme highs, extreme lows, and it's just that like you said, vicious cycle. So I understand now that I wasn't helping the situation, but I wasn't able to see it then, so I wasn't able to be honest with these facilities when I was going in there.
And never going to help if you're not honest. Of course, you're just going through the motions. You're showing up because you think it's the right thing to do, but you're not really showing up
Yeah.
properly, mentally, emotionally. What changed then? When did you actually start showing up, and when did you actually start seeking help properly? What changed in you?
You know, I'm involved in the 12-step groups, the 12-step fellowship, and they always talk about, your pain wasn't great enough yet. You know, um, that's what people are referring to when they say rock bottom. The problem with the term rock bottom is you can't you can't identify that, you know. There had been plenty of times where I thought I was at rock bottom, but then, until I got into the basement of that rock bottom, you know. So um I just got to a point where I could no longer function. I no longer wanted to live. Um, the methamphetamines, like, there was a long period of time where I needed them to go to work, right? I needed them to get out of bed, but I was somehow able to like manage that. Not well, but I was managing it to the point where I was able to go to work and I was able to appear to from the outside as being like functioning. Um, but that takes a toll on you. And I reached a point towards the end there, the end of 2020, where I was I had the drugs, I had the alcohol, but it was no longer helping. I still could not get out of bed. I spent months in my bedroom, um, still drinking, still using, but still sad and still depressed and not wanting to live. And I remember not being able to get up and go to the bathroom across the hall. Like, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I wasn't showering. I wasn't taking care of my hygiene. Um, I was shut down. So once I reached that point, I again still did not understand that I needed to be honest with people. Because at this point I was honest with myself. I knew it was a problem. So I go into a mental health facility again in 21, and I remember going in and sitting down, and I was just kind of sitting with like my head in my hands, for hours and hours on end. Um, One of the health techs that I knew because I had been in there so often kind of came to me and was like, "This is not the person we know. Like, what's going on?" And she pulled me in a room in an office, and we sat down and we talked. And I was like, I guess I was ready, you know? I just kind of just was honest with her. And that was the first time in my life I had just been honest with myself and everyone. But I wasn't, there was still some, I still had some growing to do in that honesty. I knew drugs were a problem. I knew the methamphetamine was a problem. I was not, I was not willing to make that leap to the alcohol as the problem as well.
Okay. But
Um,
you did admit to yourself for some time that there was issues here, and it was the first time that you actually admitted it to somebody else and said it out loud was in that room to that lady. At that point, how did that feel? Do you remember how that felt to say it out loud and to say it to somebody?
Fear. Um, you think it would be like a weight lifted off your shoulders, like, but it's not. Um, Part of the vicious cycle of addiction is fear, you know? Not just fear of surviving without using, but also fear of like judgment, of financial security and like all of these things. So, I don't think she said anything special to me. I honestly think the opportunity presented itself for me to find help, and I took advantage of it.
Um, it's interesting that you say fear was the leading emotion at that point that you said it out loud, because what's next? Once you've said it out loud, what's next? That's the fear, right? Now I really have to face this and tackle this. Now I've admitted it to myself and somebody else. And now the fear of judgment or losing people or, like you said, living life without these substances, which is hugely fearful for most addicts, for sure. It takes courage and bravery that doesn't stop, really. So, yeah, I mean, it's wow, a massive turning point. You entered the 12-step program, and I have done an episode before speaking to an alcoholic about this, and he has also mentioned how incredible the 12-step program is. So this 12-step program, this worked for you. I mean, essentially, in short terms, we don't need to go into detail about the full ins and outs of your recovery, but in a nutshell, this program really did work for you and is still working for you today.
Yes, the 30-day facility that I went into, that was the foundation. And that's where I was introduced to 12 steps. But certainly the 12 steps have been my grounding point. That is the design, the layout for my life. Those steps tell me how to live in a healthy manner.
Wonderful. Um, you've now been, this was 2021, we're now in 2025. You've now been sober from that point that you mentioned of saying it out loud to that lady and entering into that 30-day facility. You've been sober for now, what, 4.5 years?
Yeah, 4 years and a few months. Yes.
Wonderful. You should be so proud of yourself. I'm sure it's not been easy, and I'm sure it's not easy every day. Part of the 12-step program, as I understand it, and not experienced it myself, but just speaking to people, is paying it forward.
Yes.
And this has now, I guess, carved a path for you in your life to pay it forward in a very special way, speaking so clearly now about your experience and reflecting back on it, talking to other addicts, talking to other people who are going through recovery. You're talking from life experience. You're not talking from a textbook. You're talking from real life that really connects to somebody, that really enables them to stay in recovery themselves and come out of it. So tell me a little bit about your work now, about helping other people, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So I worked in a warehouse for the past 20 years, before getting into recovery. The very early stages of my recovery was working with a drug and alcohol counselor, on my own recovery. And I had just mentioned to him how I was struggling with my job in the warehouse. I didn't like it. I felt stuck because I was well paid and all this. Um, he kind of educated me on what a peer was. We have uh, a statewide peer certification, where I do just what you were talking about. Like, I essentially, people who are coming in for help, I work with the clinician, um, and the clinician is able to do the diagnosis and the medical stuff and the textbook stuff. But my value really comes in connecting and building rapport with people so that they feel comfortable. It kind of helps with that stigma and that fear of being honest for fear of judgment. And also, I am that shining hope. you know I too was in your shoes, and now I've made it out, which means you can make it out.
Absolutely.
So
And so you started to do that. Did you start to feel not only the importance for the other person, but did you start to feel the importance of doing that for you? Did you start to feel that reward and that, I guess that gives you just a completely different kind of purpose in your life.
yeah, purpose is a key word there, because not only did I lack hope, but I lacked purpose. I never had purpose in life. Once I got into recovery, purpose of paying the message forward, helping other people who were where I was, branched off into so many things that I do now. Um, the 12-step program, carrying the message through that, the service work involved in that. And then I started doing it for my 9 to 5, my daily job. And that was it's so satisfying, for many years, several decades, I worked a job to get a paycheck. I didn't want to be there. I certainly didn't enjoy it. It was forced. Now I go to work every day. I'm able to help people, and the feeling alone um is fantastic pay in itself. So that is just, I wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm just trying to continue to grow to be able to help people more.
And it's a journey. It's a journey. It's a learning experience. When you're working with people in the way that you are on such an intimate level, really helping people, really seeing a positive impact that you're having on that person's life is such a huge reward. But it's also so complex. So we're always learning around that. But what I love is this purpose that you found. And I just want to link it back to hope as well. So you found purpose in your job, in your life, doing this on a 9 to 5 basis. Um, would you say that that is when you started to see more hope come back into your life, or was it before that, or was it like how do those two things link?
I would say the first sign of real hope, which I really clung on to, was when I entered that 30-day treatment program out of the mental health facility. When I entered there were people who were in there who had established long-term recovery, and obviously they had made some mistakes that landed them back in there. But there were several people in that facility who had 10 years without drugs and alcohol, 15 years. And sure, they made a mistake and they came back in, but they were aware and they were correcting action to get back on goal. That was that amount of hope was so crucial to where I am now. And I hang on to
Yeah.
that. That is what I'm trying to bring to others.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, seeing you at your stage go in there, I guess, in your infancy, really, in recovery, so juvenile in that sense, but seeing people that have been there for 10 years, that gave you hope. And also the relapse is, as we know, a lot of the time a normal part of the process for lots of people, not for everyone, but for lots of people. But seeing that the relapse doesn't mean that it's the end, that there is also a way that you can come back from that if you are, that gave you hope as well. Yeah, I think that's such an important message, really. And probably not only why the 12 steps is so effective is because of the actual 12 steps, but because of the peer support, because of the peer support, which is exactly what you're doing now. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Tell me about what else you've got going on. There's a clothing line and there's some things to come in next. I know that you said that you're starting something tomorrow that's really exciting. Talk to me about all of this exciting stuff that's happening.
Yeah. So as far as employment, I worked in a clinic for the past 2 years, helping people who are coming in for help, working with people in that way. Uh, Tomorrow, I start training for a new job. I'll be transferring into the prison system. So I'll be working in the prison with people who have drug and alcohol related charges. They'll be going through, there's like an 8-month class or groups that they go through, and I'll be running those groups and kind of working with that population.
Wow, fantastic. So really, really work that you know about, but now I guess with a bit of a new demographic and a new environment, which is going to be a new challenge for you, which is so exciting.
Yeah. It's something that I've lacked my whole life that I value and prioritize now. And that's personal growth. I want to be better every day, whether that's, personal life or employment. You know,
Well, that's where the
I
hope
am
lies,
going
right?
to,
Because that means that there's hope for the
yes,
future. Because when there's hope for the future, you want to be a better person. So I want to wake up today and be better than I was yesterday. And that is just personal growth. And throwing yourself into new challenges means that you need to have lots of things, but two main things that I can think of: hope and confidence. You've lived a life where fear has been prevalent in your life. We've spoken about it today a lot, where you said as a youngster there was a home that was ridden with fear, you know, and you said that the moment that you told that lady that there was an issue and that you were aware that there was an issue, the first emotion that you felt was fear. And fear is paralyzing, it stops us from doing things. But you're going above fear and you've got the confidence and the hope and the drive to better yourself every day. And look at where you were before, some of those places that we've seen where you were before, to what you're literally starting training to do tomorrow. Or you're starting the job or you're starting training?
so it's a week-long training. So all next week I'll be doing the training, and then the following week I'll start in the
And
prison.
it's amazing, and I'm so excited for you, and I'm so excited that you're at that stage, because it's just an incredible transformation, in your identity, in your psyche, and the way that you see yourself, in the way that you see yourself in the world, and what you feel that you can achieve. You said yourself, you dropped out of school, you were just working to get money, you didn't really have anything in your future that you were striving for, essentially, for so long, and that's changed. How does that feel?
It's amazing, man. It's I see why it's so predominantly talked about, why people always talk about having purpose and hope. Um, it's my driving force.
And how is your relationship? And we haven't spoke too much about your relationship with your wife or your kids. I'm sure very complex, around addiction. And I'm sure there's been ups and downs, like every relationship there's been. But your wife has been a consistent, which all respect for the two of you, because somehow you've managed to stay together through lots of ups and downs. How generally now is your relationship with your wife, with your children, with your grandchildren, in comparison to how it has been in the past with those dark times?
Me and my wife, certainly went through our rough patches, particularly towards the end of the addiction. But things have gotten so much better. My relationships in general have gotten much, much better. Um, but me and my wife get along very well, and there's very little friction in our relationship, in our marriage. Me and my daughter, you said it, we have a complex relationship, right? Where she's an adult, she has a family of her own, um, and my recovery didn't come until after her upbringing. So, with that being said, there are some things there that make it a little bit of a complex relationship, but all in all, we speak, we get along, you know, I love her to death, and my grandchildren have, uh, I don't know if they remember me as that guy, you know, um,
which is great.
because they were young.
Yeah, it means that
Yeah,
you have
so
an opportunity to build new relationships there. And I'm doing this podcast called Used to Be's Do Count because we as humans never stay static. We don't stay the same. We change, we develop, we grow, we evolve, hopefully for the better. Certainly it is in your case. So our relationships with our loved ones also should develop and change over the time as well. And I just hope that there are bridges being built with your daughter. It can't have been easy for her as well as you. But what is so amazing to hear is that you have hope in the future with that relationship, and that you're building that relationship with your grandchildren as well, which gives you as a grandparent another chance. And I know lots of grandparents feel that they've got another chance with their grandchildren in a completely different way. So it's so wonderful. Tell me a little bit about the clothing line, Breeze, as well.
yeah. So stigma is a huge part of not just addiction but mental health as well. Um, and the 12 steps, we talked about that, instilling, like, carrying the message forward. So I was I never wanted to start a business. It just organically happened. Uh, I was thinking of ways to um, start conversations and get people talking about addiction and mental health struggles, and kind of lowering that stigma, educating people. So I made a few shirt designs. I invested some money in, like, printing equipment, and it's just kind of grown from there. So, I do all of the design work and printing out of my home. My wife helps me with a little bit of the business, but it's pretty much a one man show.
Well, this is wonderful because, again,
And
this is showing a completely different side of you, which is the creative side, right? You've got all of this life experience and you're using all of that in this emotional capability of helping others in your peer support. But now you found something that gives you a creative outlet as well, which still sends the message that you're trying to send, but gives you a creative outlet of design and print, and then running a business, which with all of the challenges that happen with that on a day-to-day basis as well, of course. And it's just, again, another amazing thing to hear that you found that outlet. It's incredible. Where can people find these wonderful t-shirt prints?
yeah, so we have a website. It's fourthdimensionapparel.com. That's the number four, TH, Dimension Apparel. We also are on social media, Facebook and Instagram, where you can purchase, we have shirts, hoodies, hats, slides, like flip flops. You can purchase them directly through the social media sites as well.
I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes for anyone who's interested and wants to take a look. And I hope that if anyone's out there, they support it, they support the cause.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think it's important to mention that we do donate a portion of all of our sales to local recovery communities. So at this time, It's to recovery organizations in my community. But the rest of the money is pretty much reinvested back into the business, with the ultimate goal of getting people talking. What does that shirt mean? That kind of opens up a discussion where we can talk about mental health and addiction.
And it's so important, and it's so effective as well. It does work, and it's worked for other businesses over here in the UK that I've seen, and I know that it works. So good for you, man. Good for you. You've spoke so openly about your experience, which has been tough. And I mean, really and truly, most people in life wouldn't have gone through half of the stuff that you've been through: the trauma, the abuse, the grief, so much grief around your family, the addiction, and the sort of dark places that you've been in. But where you found yourself now is truly inspiring for somebody like me who's an outsider looking in. It's kind of like you're one of those everyday heroes now in your community, where you are actually helping people on the ground either get on track or stay on track, or both of those things. And you found some hope in your creative outlets, in your business, in your family, and you've got, like you said, purpose, right? You've got your purpose back. How do you look back at some of those dark moments now and reflect? It's a big question. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but it's called Used to Be's Do Count. So this episode is called I Used to Be Hopeless. Sitting where you are today, with hope, with purpose, with some positive outlook for the future, how can you look back and reflect on all of that? I'm going to say all of that shit that you've been through and how far you've come.
This is a question that I've put a lot of thought into in my recovery. I have to be grateful. I didn't understand that when it was proposed to me early in my recovery. But it made me who I am, and it brought me where I am. So I have to be grateful for the plan that God has laid out for me.
I love that. Gratitude is everything. It's everything.
Yeah.
As an addict, as a recovering addict as well, it's important for you never to become complacent, right?
Yeah. It's one of them things where, all of the things that I do in my life, while the goal of them may be something else, one of the benefits is keeping that pain fresh in my mind and not allowing myself to forget where I come from. And the truth is that I'm just one bad decision away from being right back where I started.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to say, or anything that you want to leave us with? Any stone that's been left unturned before we say goodbye today? You don't have to.
I just want to, if you're watching this and you feel that you're struggling, it's never too late. Reach out. There are people who have made it through to the other side, and you're not alone. So don't let fear, shame restrict you from reaching out for help.
Wonderful. I really hope someone is out there listening to this that needed to hear that. And thank you so much for being here and sharing your story so honestly. I really, really appreciate that, Brezz. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It was fun.
Wow, what a story. What an incredible transformation. I just commend Brezz so much for being so open and honest about the experiences that he's had. And one thing that I really commend Brezz for is taking so much accountability for his own actions. Really looking back now and reflecting on everything that he went through, he's really not remaining in a victim state of mind. And that really helps healing and personal growth. And also for just changing his life around. I mean, we all know how addiction can get hold of us in lots of different ways. And I don't think that anyone can really go through life without either feeling some level of addiction yourself or knowing somebody that has suffered with severe levels of addiction. I think we live in a world now where we are all addicted to something. So maybe not as extreme drug and alcohol misuse as Brezz, but we're all addicted to our phones, we're addicted to consuming. Most of us can be managing some sort of alcoholism because it's so prevalent in our society. There's addiction to work, there's addiction to all sorts of things, and I don't think that anyone is excluded from feeling some levels of addiction. Brezz went down into some really dark places and he was really open about sharing those with me, and I really do appreciate that. I hope that that helps anyone out there who is in need of hearing that, just that you are not alone if you're dealing with that. And I really hope that you take Brezz's words of advice about seeking help and knowing that you are not alone. There are wonderful people out there doing wonderful work, and now Brezz is one of them. I wish you all the best, Brezz, in the future with everything that you do. I really hope that all of the people that you are helping has a huge impact. I just want to wish you all the best for the future. Hey you, yes, I am talking to you, my lovely listener. Have you given my podcast a star rating from where you're listening? If not, I would really appreciate your feedback. Please leave comments, engage with me on my socials, and also leave a star rating. It really does help me. Also, if you liked this episode or any other episodes, make sure that you spread the word, tell your loved ones, tell your friends and family, and spread the love. That's all I ask of you. I will see you very soon on another episode. Until then, stay safe, stay fabulous. I'll see you soon.